Hello, everyone, and welcome to Stamp Panels, the back of the book. I want to thank a bunch of people, all you folks, for coming, checking out our panel. These are for everyone to sit back and enjoy. I want to thank our panelists for stepping up and helping out. This is not possible without all the help I'm getting from panelists to speakers to everyone else. Thank you. And I want to especially thank Sparks Auctions for sponsoring and helping out as well. And if you get a chance, drop by their website and check out if they have any future auctions coming up at sparks-auctions.com. I know I always bid at every auction they have. There's always something there for someone. So today's topic is the back of the book. And I want to just do a little tiny bit as introduction to what is the back of the book. So if you give me a second, because of course, being the moderator and the guy doing everything that knows what's going on, I didn't pre-open stuff. So give me a second here, and no, don't close the meeting. And there we go. Okay, so. Ingo actually was very nice, and he sent me a short little slide here explaining what the back of the book is. So for anyone that doesn't know, if you find Scott's standard postage stamp catalog, at the very literally back of the book, they have extra stuff. Now, this extra stuff is not under the regular numbering, and it's not used for paying regular postage, but it is used for paying other duties than normal postage. And they do list things in the back of the book. And some of the things are semi-postal, which if you notice here, there's little letters in front of it, B, so that means the numbers would start with a B. Some of the examples, airmail, special delivery, registration, these are all in the back of the Scott's catalog. Military, war tax, parcel post, this kind of stuff here. So one of the things that surprised me greatly, and probably surprised a lot of people, in the back of the Scott listing, this is all kinds of stuff that they list there with numbers in front of it. I mean, there's war tax, special deliveries, postal tax, newspaper, marine insurance. It's like crazy amount of stuff that's back there that's all postal related and all highly collectible. One of the other things is if you look through individual countries' catalogs, they also have back of the book material. So I had a 2017 Unitrade, so I pulled it up, and this is back of the book for Unitrade. I mean, they have officially numbered stuff, and the same numbers like F for registration. It's F in Scott's, it's F in Unitrade, but they also have all this unlettered listings, which that was the section that really surprised me at how huge it was. They list annual collections, they list thematic collections broken out by different topics. They list, well, you can read it there, reply coupons, 4-ring numerical cancels, Christmas seals. It's a huge amount. And I'm sure if you go through other countries' individual catalogs, they'll all have their own thing listed. So that's what back of the book is, and kind of what we're doing today. And first up is going to be Ingo. Now, he sent me a little notice of what he wanted me to say, which I'm going to completely ignore. And I'm going to tell you, Ingo, I joined the Bramley Stamp Club many years ago, and Ingo was a member, and he came and became my friend and my stamp mentor. I looked up to him immensely, and he's helped me a lot. So there's a personal connection there. He's also like well accomplished. He's a fellow of the Royal Philatelic Society of London, as well as the Philatelic Society of Canada, past president of the PSSC. He has a blog, Instagram, just beautiful stamps. So everyone after this, after the talk on last week, you learned all about Instagram, so you can go check out his Instagram account at Just Beautiful Stamps. And I just want to say, Ingo, thanks for everything you've done for me, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say today.
Wow, my head is swollen. All right, so can I share the screen?
Absolutely.
All right. So I had prepared a talk that Joe has already started, so I am going to go quickly through the first few slides, but I do illustrate some of the points that Joe made, so I will show those. So I just changed a few things around, but here's the examples I did, and what I put on was the actual Scott listing number. So the semi-postal would be from Germany, number B539, and this very clever design of a paper airplane for special delivery from Spain. I love that. Correspondencia urgente. That is such a beautiful thing to have a paper airplane shooting out to denote special delivery. And it's Spain number E23, and so on and so forth. And then here's some other examples. The Bahraini postal tax. I got that when I was working in the Middle East, and you had to put those stamps on every letter that you sent for some reason. They're collecting an extra tax. And one of my favorite issues is the parcel posts of the US, that beautiful set that's all carmine colors. So there's no colors to it, but the designs are just so beautiful. And it's a pleasure to collect parcel post stamps. Anyways, my specialty that I'm going to talk about is postage due, the J's. And postage due stamps are some people call them postage due labels because they don't agree that they're actual stamps because they don't pay postage. But there's a debate on that we won't get into here. I still call them stamps because they look like stamps. They've got perforations, and we collect them as stamp collectors. So to me, postage due stamps are stamps. They were issued for the purpose of correcting shortages of postage that could have been either by ignorance on the sender, making a mistake, maybe a rate changed and the postage rate increased and they didn't know it yet, or they didn't want to accept it. So for the first few months of every postal rate increase, there's a bunch of people that short pay their mail. Sometimes they say, I want this to go by airmail, but they only pay the rate for surface mail. And of course, there's the intentional underpayment where people try to defraud the post office. I've seen things like a 2-cent stamp from a booklet being used to mail a letter domestically in Canada. And it got through. Not everything in postage due gets caught. But anyways, that's in the early days of postal history, like talking after 1840, every penny counted and was accounted for because the rates of postage were so low. It was like halfpenny or a penny or a 1 or 2 or 3 cents. That was like the extent of the rates for the most part for domestic mail. And so every cent was accounted for, and they developed systems to make sure that in case somebody underpaid, that they'd have a system for getting the shortage made up to protect the revenue of the post office in the country. The earliest postage dues, I don't know the exact date. I didn't have time to go through the 12 volumes of the Scott catalog and look at every country that issued postage dues to find out who was the earliest one. But I do know that there's 1 or 2 countries that started issuing them in the 1860s. France started in the 1870s. The United States started also in the 80s. So these things go back a long way. Most countries have issued postage due stamps. There's very few, if you go through the Scots, you'll find very few that don't have J stamps. Sometimes you find postage dues used for other purposes than making up shortages of postage, such as customs duties, and I'll show examples of all of these later on when I get into just a little bit of postal history. They use postage due stamps to pay the fee for poste restante, business reply mail, and other purposes, so that you can find postage dues used in a variety of ways. So I'm going to give a few examples of different countries that issue them and how they approach it. So one thing is the appellation, meaning how they call it. In most countries, they just, in English-speaking countries, they call it postage due. But there are a lot of places, and a lot of the British places call it, say, to pay instead of postage due. And it's confusing. And I don't even know why they have that dichotomy, because Britain itself, the mother of stamps, calls their stamps postage due, and in the same set calls them to pay. So I don't even know why they have that dichotomy, but anyways, it's an interesting side thing to notice. In the French-speaking world, they usually call it timbre tax or chiffre tax, apercevoir. Chiffre tax, apercevoir means to collect. And then there's some countries that don't even say anything on their stamps, like this one issue from Austria. It's a whole set of postage dues from 1 groschen, which is the low value, up to there's like 16 stamps in that set, and they have no delineation that they're postage dues. But I know it because I looked it up, and it's under the J section in the back of the book of Austria. Another word that I don't have an illustration for is Porto. A lot of Slavic countries and some other European countries use the term Porto on their stamps to denote that it's postage due. In terms of styles, a lot of postage dues around the world are very generic, not generic, but graphic designs. They don't commemorate stuff. They don't put pictures on them. In the British Commonwealth and British Empire, they have these kind of designs where it's a very straightforward big white circle and you put your value in, and then they have variations on the borders. And I love these. These are just finding those, the pure beauty of the graphics is something that attracts me a lot to these stamps. And then look at this baby from Ireland. I mean, this is a 1980s version of their postage due sets. They had previous ones before that that were also very pretty, but this design, it is totally graphically beautiful. It's clean. They just say what it is and have a couple of squares, and the font of the 4 is one of the most beautiful 4s I've ever seen, and it's just a delight to have stamps like that. And that set comes in also about 12 values, and they all have different colors, and one is more beautiful than the other. The Malaysian one, they use the term denda, which I guess is the Malaysian term for due or postage due or tax or something. I didn't look it up. But again, a nice graphic design, and this is another set that goes from like 1 cent to 50 cents or something, and everyone has a different color. This is an interesting one. Apercevoir timbre tax. It's a French one, obviously, but it's not France. It's French colonies. These were used in French colonies, primarily in Africa. And again, the graphics of this design just knock me out. I mean, look at how they make that sort of a negative white oval with the blue surround, and then the blue with African style graphics to make the 10 cents. It's just a beautiful stamp if you think about it design wise. It's almost 3-dimensional or op art if you look at the little squares in the surrounding thing. It's a very, very spectacular design stamp, and very innocently doing its duty to collect postage due. But there are countries that have pictorial designs. Andorra is an example. At first they had the standard French postage due graphic stamps, and then they decided, hey, let's liven them up. Maybe some stamp collectors will buy them, and they put on flowers and fruits and berries and birds and all kinds of stuff. So I just give one example there. I should say at this point, in general, for the most part, postage dues were not available at post office counters. They were used internally by postal employees and were not sold to the public until, I want to say, the 70s or the 80s, when philatelic bureaus would sell them to the philatelic public through their, their bureaus and so on. But at a postal counter, you normally couldn't get a postage due because it was just meant to be used, for what the duty that it was doing. Monaco issued some beautiful timbre tax stamps with ships on them, and Jersey has a couple of beautiful, beautiful postage due sets. This one being the high value of a set from the 1980s, showing the marina. And just everyone in that set has a different color, and from one to the next, they're more beautiful. So let's talk about a little bit more about Canada. I'm going to choose a couple of countries to show their postage due stamps a little bit more detailed. So Canada has issued five designs of postage dues. They've gone through different iterations, but I just named them. The first postage due issue, which went 22 years from 1906 to 28. It's pure, it's engraved, and it's pure engine turning. And it's, I love how they highlight the 4 with the shading. So the 4 sort of jumps out at you. And same thing with the word postage due, it's shaded. So it really pops out, and it looks like the tablet that the 4 is on is like depressed. It gives it a 3-dimensional feel. The second postage due issue, all they did was change you see these ornaments on the sides of the tablet, they just reversed them. I think they adjusted the design a bit too, but anyways, they reversed the ornaments going inwards instead of outwards. They lasted only a couple of years during the Great Depression. And at one point, somebody said, hey, you know what? We're a bilingual country. We should maybe make our postage dues bilingual. So in 1933, they issued the third postage due issue and came up with this design. It's not as attractive as the first two, but it does the job. And that fat, wide 2 is another font for those of us who like graphics. That's a font that I can see all the time. A very long reigning postage due set was started in 1935. They became vertical instead of being horizontal stamps, and they were used for 30 years in Canada. Because they had such a long time, there are different printings and a few varieties, but essentially they really got used a lot, and they're quite inexpensive to get, even in plate blocks and so on. And then the last one, which is a completely different design, it's called the Centennial Postage Due. It's the 5th one, but it wasn't really anything to do with Canada's centennial. It's just that it was issued in 1967, so it got that appellation. But it's a design that at first I didn't care much for it, but the more I study these things, the more I realize they are doing the job of what they're supposed to do, and that is collecting postage when people underpay. And those arrows and that sort of shading in the back and everything, it does grow on you if you look at a lot of them. And that issue, it only lasted about 11 years. They were using them into the early 80s, but basically Canada stopped issuing postage due stamps after that issue. There are about 5 iterations of the design. They have a little bit larger picture tablets. They have a little bit, they have some perforation varieties. They have a lot of paper and fluorescent varieties. It's one that is a specialist's dream if you like those kind of things. And finding them used on cover is always fun, because in the 60s and 70s and 80s, post offices around the world, including Canada, started to question the practice of postage, because now the rates were in the 30 cents and 40 cents for postage. And well, I'm getting ahead of myself. It was 17, 30, maybe 35 cents for first class postage in that time. And as postage rates went up, it became more uneconomical to collect postage due with payment of a stamp. They still do collect it even to this day, but they don't issue stamps for it. They just do markings on the envelope saying, hey, you owe me so much because you short paid. But doing a whole stamp thing for it, it was a lot of work and labor for the post office. And so most administrations between the 1980s and the early 2000s stopped issuing postage due stamps. So there's a finite timeline that you can enjoy this part of the hobby. Okay, and then we have Britain. This is one of my favorite. This is what got me started in being interested in postage dues. I love these, again, the design of this series. So this was the first British postage due series, which started in 1914. And they used that same design for 55 years up to 1969. And you see the dichotomy I talked about earlier. Some of them are called postage due, others are said to pay. And like I say, I don't understand why they had that difference, but they have the national symbols of Great Britain there, the thistle from Scotland, I think that's the rose from England, the Irish shamrock, and whatever that flower is for Wales. But it's a beautiful floral design, and what you can enjoy in that set is lots of different watermark varieties, because every time a reign would change, when George V passed on, and we had we had Edward VIII, which they had a watermark with Edward VIII cipher on it for a very short time. He was only king in 1936 for a few months, so that's the scarce one. And then George VI came in, and Queen Elizabeth, and then they changed the watermarks, and then they had no watermarks. That's a set that you can spend a lifetime specializing in, just collecting the stamps, not even touching the postal history. In 1970, they decided, okay, let's be modern in Britain and make the stamps a little bit more graphically modern, up to date. And they issued this second postage due issue. I do like this a lot. That whoosh of the half with that strong shading jumping out at you, and then the little P also making sure that you know, is contrasted by the curly Q italic writing to pay. It's like just a day and night kind of graphic depiction, but very effective. And the set goes up to £5. Every one of the values is beautiful in its own right with the colors they use. And they changed, so this design with the whoosh of the value goes up to, I think, 10 pence. And after that, they go to this design with without the, the shading of the value is a lot more toned down. Then in 1982, they changed the design of the postage dues. This is I like the graphics, but it's not as exciting as the others. The one thing that I discovered when I was studying these a little bit, you notice on the tuppence, they have the dark shade in the bottom and the light shading in the top. And on the £1, and I think it starts at the 20 pence where they do this, you have the light shading in the bottom and the dark shading in the top, and the reverse on the value. So there's some interest in there. But like I say, these are a little bit more, I won't say boring, but a little bit more, everyday ordinary. And then the last issue, design-wise and color-wise, printing-wise, these are some of the most beautiful postage dues ever printed, with the one big problem that this was the time when they were stopping to use postage dues. And these suckers are very readily available mint, but completely scarce used, or extremely scarce on cover. 2000 was the last year that they had postage dues. They had an official time to shut it down, and people pay a lot of money to find these stamps on cover. They're embossed with the crown. I love that embossing, and you could see the spectacular coloring they do with this. So if you want to specialize just in one country of postage dues, I've just given you a couple of examples you can maybe have some fun with. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about postal history. It's quite a challenge to collect postage due postal history, meaning covers. Because the volume of mail worldwide is so big, the number of short paid covers is a fraction of that. But even with that, there's a lot of them around. but how many of them actually get caught by postal officials is the question, because like I said before, a lot of them just get through with nobody noticing. So ones that are marked for postage due are still somewhat abundant. And when you start getting serious about it, you realize there's actually a lot of this mail around. But in your everyday looking through boxes of covers, you don't see a lot of these. So there's a challenge just to find them. When you do the postal history, you need to study the rates. You need to know postal rates so that you know how much was short paid and how the deficiency was handled. The standard UPU rule is, I shouldn't say standard, but the rule of thumb, according to UPU regulations after a certain date, which I don't remember what it is that the postage due would be double the deficiency. So if there was a letter sent at 5 and posted with 5 cents rate, and it should have had an 8-cent stamp because maybe it was airmail, the deficiency is 3 cents. So the postage due collected at the destination would be 6 cents, double the 3 cents deficiency. And there's all kinds of really interesting markings to show that, and all kinds of interesting calculations that you can do to figure out how they rate postage due covers. And I will show you some examples shortly. Usually the postage due is charged to the consignee or the receiver, the addressee of the letter. But in some cases, the letter is returned for additional postage, and those usually don't get postage dues on them, just get hand stamps and a notation that, okay, the sender short paid, but we sent it back to him and he came and paid the difference, and then the letter goes on its way. All these permutations and interesting things that you can study are studied by a group called the Postage Due Mail Study Group based in the UK. And I'm a member of that, and I have a few colleagues in Canada who are members, and it's a fascinating place where you have all kinds of knowledge about rates and the markings and the use of the stamps from worldwide. It's really a fun thing to do if you want to pursue that kind of thing. If you get serious about postage dues, that's the organization you need to be part of. And they don't just cover UK or Great Britain stamps, they cover worldwide. All right, I'm going to give just a few examples of usage of postage dues on cover. So here's one from Britain to Hong Kong, mailed in 1983. They paid by meter 19.5 pence, and that was short. I'm not going to go through all the calculations, but in the end, it ended up that they calculated to be equal to $2.30 Hong Kong as double the difference. And that is paid by a couple of $1 Hong Kong postage dues. It's hard to see because they're yellow, but those are $1. It's a pair of $1 and a 20 and a 10, making up $2.30. It's not a super scarce thing, but it's a fun one to have, and to get the usage of Hong Kong postage dues on cover is always a good thing. Then I show an example of the business reply mail. And again, I'm using a Hong Kong example because that's one of my specialties of country collections is Hong Kong. So I happen to have some postage due examples from them. So this was a local letter sent from the, well, I don't know who it was sent from, but it was a licensee, a person who had a license to do business reply service. Well, it would have been, yeah, it would have been the Hong Kong Oxygen Company who was the licensee. And somebody mailed them probably a payment or maybe an answer to an inquiry or something, and they didn't have to put postage on, and the postage was paid by the licensee with a 10-cent due. So it wasn't a postage due situation. It was, we're paying for the postage because we want our customers to have free postage. And because of that, there was no double deficiency. This was the local rate in Hong Kong at the time, 10 cents for a local letter. So it didn't have to do a double deficiency of 20 cents. The next one is a kind of interesting one. It's philatelic. Absolutely, it's philatelic. It's a first flight cover that a Canadian guy got to Lufthansa to put on their first flight going from Frankfurt to Hong Kong via all these other places, Cairo, Karachi, Calcutta, Bangkok. And anyway, so he had this addressed to probably a friend of his or maybe even an imaginary person at Poste Restante in Hong Kong. Poste Restante means if you put that term on a letter, it means you're asking the post office at the destination to hold that letter and somebody will come and pick it up. And a lot of post offices charge fees for that, a very minimal fee. And in the case of Hong Kong, they charge 2 cents. So what happened here is the guy didn't show up. It says unknown, and nobody came to collect it. So it went to the return letter office in Hong Kong, and they said, okay, well, somebody's got to pay our 2 cent fee for Poste Restante. So they made it postage due, sending it back to the sender, Mr. Hooper in Granby, Quebec, Canada. And when it got to Mr. Hooper, he had to pay 2 cents postage due. So that's a postage due for a fee that should have been paid. And again, that means it didn't get charged double deficiency. It just was paying the straight fee. And then the last one I have is an example of postage dues paying customs duty. Purists in the postage due world want postage due stamps just to pay deficient postage. But I like the stamps themselves, and I like to see them used. And if I see them used in a different way, I still like them. It doesn't change my opinion of them. So I find these things very collectible. So here's a cover that was sent from India in the 1930s to England. It probably had an enclosure of some product. We don't know what. It says contents there on the side, but I couldn't make out what the stuff was. But whatever it was, it came up. This label is upside down, so I just inverted it for you to see better. British customs charge of 2 shillings 9 pence, and there's a post office fee for customs clearance of 6 pence. So the total was 3 shillings 3 pence. And there's the 3 shillings 3 pence being paid by postage due stamps in England in 1930s. A beautiful use of those stamps to my eyes. And that's one way you can collect those things if you want to get into postal history. So that's my last cover, and I'm going to say thank you for listening, and I'll turn the meeting back to Joe.
Great, Ingo, thank you very much. I just want to remind everyone, if you have any questions, there's a Q&A button at the bottom, usually at the bottom, might be at the right. Just type them all in, and at the end, after all the speakers go, we'll go through the questions and answer them as best as we can. So next up is Chris Hargreaves, and he is the Philatelic guru. He does exhibits, and that's how I first met him. I think it was at the he won the grand award for a Philatelic thing, and I was looking at it, and he wandered by and answered a bunch of questions I had and spent like a bit of time with me explaining it. I know he writes for edits a magazine. He's been president. Are you president or past president of Philatelic groups? And in fact, just in honor of Chris, I've got my Philatelic cover as my background. So I'll turn it over to you, Chris, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, thank you, Joe. But I must correct you, I have never come close to winning a grand award. I have come close to chatting to you. I have had very enjoyable chats with you, but not with a grand award.
Oh, okay. My apologies. I thought it was you.
No, well, I'm flattered, and maybe some other time. Now,
well, you deserve one.
Let me see. Well, this looks good. This. Okay, so my focus on this talk is why are airmail stamps in the back of the book? because as Joe read out, the definition is that the back of the book pays duties other than postage. But these stamps, these are the ones with the C prefix, could all be used to pay postage. So I'm looking at why are they there? And the second theme is if you go to your Unitrade specialized catalog of Canadian stamps, you'll find that not only do we have the C prefix ML stamps, we have the CLPs, the CLs, and the CEs. So what are all these stamps and why are they in the back of the book? So to begin with the first ones, the CLPs referred to as the pioneer stamps. And this was the first ML type stamp issued in Canada. It was in 1918 and it was a fundraiser organized by the Aero Club of Canada to get publicity for aviation. The Royal Air Force was keen to show what they could do, and so they organized some airmail flights between Toronto and Ottawa. And there were these special stamps issued, and all the proceeds were to go to the Aero Club of Canada. And the first flight went on August the 15th, but the stamps weren't ready. The second flight, and this is a cover from it, was on August 26th. The third flight, they managed to do the same day to and from Toronto on September 4th. Now, the stamps were controversial at the time because they were not issued under the post office regulations. They were regarded as charity labels. And the instructions were that they had to be placed on the back of the envelope and they were not to show a value. So they're not stamps, except that they were sold in post offices and a letter would not be flown without having one of these stamps on it. So are they stamps or not?
Chris, can I interrupt for a second?
Yep.
Your screen share is not working. We're not seeing your images. We're just seeing your beautiful face.
Oh. Okay. Let me. Thank you for pointing that out. Let me get out of this. Let me try screen share. Let me try that.
There we go.
From beginning.
Yes.
How
we're
does
on.
that look?
Perfect.
Perfect.
So sorry about that. I was talking but muted.
Okay, so the first screen had the 9 ML stamps issued by Canada. And then here are the CLPs, the CLs, and the CEs. And I say the idea is to say, why are these all there? This is a newspaper clipping from the Toronto Star, August the 23rd, 1918. And this has the conditions. The special stamp of the Aero Club must be on the back of the envelope. Doesn't show the value, except the story is that these were the conditions agreed to, and they did the draft stamps, showed them to the secretary of the Aero Club of Canada, and he said, well, that's fine, but they don't have a value on them. So somebody listened to the secretary and put the value of 25 cents on each of the stamps. So the first ones had no value, second ones have a value, which meant they should not have been used as stamps, but they were used anyway. And So these are the first of the pioneer airmail stamps, and there was 7 of them altogether for different events up until 1928. And the next set of stamps are the semi-officials. That's the cover I was commenting about, with the stamp on the back, proper stamp, no value. And then we get to the semi-official stamps. And these have to be put in historical perspective. 1924 was the great gold rush of Naran in Quebec. Lots of gold being discovered, but in a very remote area way north of the St. Lawrence and Wolf Island, which we were talking about earlier, which is about here. Leaving that aside, the real thing was that Rouen was 2 days by land from the closest railway station, which was at Anglais. And to get from Anglais to Rouen, it took 4 different boats and portages and 2 days, until somebody decided, let's try an air service. And you had Laurentide Air Service came. They had some old World War I flying boats. They had a crew of 2 and 3 passengers. And that reduced the traveling time from Anglais to Rouen to 1 hour. That was great, but it was expensive. It cost $40 one way, and according to Statistics Canada, that is equivalent to $620 in 2021. And another complication is that people were happy to pay $620 to get into Rouen, and they used it to get in food, they used it to get in supplies. There was hardly anything coming out. And so the aircraft were flying in full and coming out empty, which made the economic situation really precarious. But one of the things they were being asked to do at the time was carry mail into people in Rouen. And initially this was done by favor, and then they said, well, maybe we can make some money for it. So they made a deal with the post office, and the post office allowed them to produce semi-official stamps. Now, these were very similar to the pioneer stamps. They were sort of like charity labels. They had to be on the back of the cover. No value was allowed. The extra requirement for the semi-official mail was that the post office did not accept responsibility for delivery. And this was not actually because they didn't trust the aircraft to fly. It was because at this time, the post office thought its responsibility was to deliver mail to the person it was addressed to, which is why we get these wonderful redirected covers which go all over the place. The post office reckoned that when it handed the mail over to the airline, that was it. It was up to the airline to get it to the person it was supposed to. So this is the first flight cover. They'd had to move the base from Anglais to Haileybury. These were float planes, and there were too many logs drifting around at Anglais. So they had to move the base to clear water. First flight, September 21st. And to begin with, they thought, okay, they printed 200 stamps, 25 booklets, and totally underestimated the interest of philatelists who wanted these stamps, with the result that they then had a second printing, 3,720 stamps produced. Still underestimated the demand. So then they had a third stamp, 3,000 printed in panes of 20, and another 3,000 printed in booklets. So they went from a first order of 200 stamps to about 10,000. And the other thing which was becoming apparent at this time is that philatelists were not only interested in the stamps, they liked first flight covers. Aviation was exciting, the North was exotic, and people liked first flight covers as a sort of a way of having contact with all this exploration going on in the Canadian North. So here you have a first flight cover with a cachet stamp, and unfortunately the service didn't last long as the aircraft crashed on the third day of the service. And that put Laurentide Air Service out of business, but the business model was established. And over the next 8 years, all these companies started up flying mail, passengers' goods in different places. Some of them lasted hardly any time. Others, like Western Canada Airways, actually became successful companies. But the model of these companies producing stamps to be sold to collectors, flying first flight covers on their new services, became part of the economic model for the early airline aviation industry in Canada. And so the argument can definitely be made that philately sped up the development of aviation in Canada. Quite how much is an interesting topic. But as I say, Laurentide was in 1924. 1927 was the first time the Canadian Post Office started paying for mail to be flown. And in 1928, end of 1928, the Post Office actually decided to produce a fast airmail service. It was going to begin operate between Toronto and Montreal. Aircraft leaving Leaside at 9:45, gets to Montreal 1 p.m. And there was going to be an extra fee for it of 5 cents for the first ounce, 10 cents for each succeeding ounce. Normally you expect things to get cheaper as the volume goes up. In this case, they wanted to restrict the mail to letters and business correspondence. They didn't want it used for parcels. So if you were over 1 ounce, the rate went up. Now, if you are paying 5 cents to get your letter flown, how do you distinguish it from regular mail? The instruction was you had to write airmail on it, but this was a big problem at the time, which is why there's all this variety of envelopes could be bought, specially marked, so people would know that this was an airmail letter. And as part of this, when the airmail stamp, first airmail stamp came out, it was only to be used on airmail, not regular mail. So again, it fits the back of the book criteria in the first place, since the first stamps could only be used for airmail, they couldn't be used for regular postage. The other question or issue which arose with the airmail stamps and airmail is now you've got a service which can get a letter from Toronto to Montreal, Montreal to Toronto, in between cities during the day, but then you don't want it to sit in the post office until the following day to be delivered. And so you had the post office version of same-day delivery, which was special delivery stamps. And for a fee of 20 cents, in this case, once the letter arrived at the post office, in this case, it was sent from Winnipeg to Chicago, a telegraph boy would immediately take the letter to the place it was addressed to. And so you could have mailed this, it says in Winnipeg, you know, during the night, it says 1. When it arrived in Chicago, it would get to the arts club that afternoon. And initially, this is the slide I was going to say at the beginning. There were the 9 airmail stamps in Canada, and up until the 1942, if you wanted the, let's call it the same day service, you had to put a special delivery stamp on it. Whereas in 1942, they issued a new stamp. It is the Airmail Express. It included airmail service and special delivery in one stamp. And so these are the stamps with the CE prefix to them. So the C was the regular airmail, the CLP was the pioneers, the CL, the semi-officials, and the CEs, the Canadian Express. And Joe said I could only talk for 10 to 15 minutes, so I will reluctantly stop. There you go, Joe.
Hey, thank you very much. That's interesting. I didn't realize that special delivery meant it was like the same day. So that's very interesting. If you can stop sharing, and then what I'll introduce our final speaker on the back of the book. And that's Mr. John Wilson, who will have to unmute himself. There we go. Now, John is an interesting individual, to say the least. I remember when the very first time I went down to this Philatelic Special Society of Canada, I was overwhelmed. There was all these unbelievable philatelists, judges, international judges, all these people. And John came over and spent some time. He talked to me, made me feel welcome, and I'll always remember him for that. And then if you want to know anything, ask him, because if he doesn't know it off the top of his head, which I'll be surprised if that's not the case, he can look in his collection of 8,000 books on philately. Probably more, I'm not sure. But thank you, John, for agreeing to talk today, and over to you.
Thanks very much. We've gone from technically smooth to technically challenged to completely incompetent on my part, so I'm going to be mostly talking to you. Computers loathe my very existence. I want to talk a little bit about the catalog, and particularly the Scott catalog, and then to go to some of the smaller categories which are listed therein. The first thing to say to everyone who might be listening tonight is something we always forget to do is to read the introduction to the catalogs. We get the latest edition and rush to our pet country to see if our new stamps and our old stamps have gone up in value, find out new varieties, but we very rarely take the time to look at the technical introductions to our catalogs. In the case of Scott, it's interesting because they list pretty carefully what they have included and why they have included it. And it's something that we might want to remember, that Scott is not built on quite the same predication that Stanley Gibbons catalog or a Maury or a Michel catalog might be. They were very much affected by the desire by collectors to have completeness, and major numbers were what was collected in the early days of Scott. So their listings are somewhat haphazard. They are very conscientious about new issues, but their ways are very much set in stone, I would say. And I would like to say that one of the most interesting things you can do about back of the book is actually look at a favorite country of yours. Any world power, particularly one that is engaged in aggressive war, has an incredibly complex philatelic history. And you might do pretty well with France. You're very challenged by Germany or by Russia. And you bow down in despair when you see the complexity of China. You just say, I'm not even going to get into this stuff. I can't tell one overprint from another. But when you do look at the back of the book for subsidiary jurisdictions, puppet states, occupation areas, then you learn a lot more about your stamps. I'd like to focus on speaking about one of my little pet interests, and it is the country of Colombia. If you go to the back of the book with Colombia, there are some subsidiary categories, and then you get into issues of what we now call departments, but at the time, these were federated states. The Colombian postal system did not adequately serve its states. There was a network of national postal routes, and off those routes, you were on your own. So the more prosperous states issued for more than 30 years their own stamps to deal with the absence of federal post offices. And those stamps are extremely collectible. They range from very primitive and charming to quite sophisticated issues. When you get involved in a field like this, you make an interesting realization. Very few places had canceling devices. Mostly you are looking at manuscript cancels. And if you want to take the time, there are several hundred of them, and it's an awful lot of fun to pick them up and try to establish from the cancels what the likely postal routes were. There is reference material on it, but it's also fairly obscure. And if you collect a little department like Antioquia, you'll discover it has all sorts of exciting stuff. It has, let me see if I made a list of it somewhere. It has late fee. It has advice of reception AR. It has all kinds of bizarre little subsets. And when you get into the back of the book that way, just go to your favorite country and look at all the other possibilities of its subsidiary governments. Now, let's talk a bit about some of the less known categories. I'd like to start, we've had A and J, and D is what I'd like to talk to you about. D is pneumatic post. And you will find that Italy is included. Italy went right up to, I think, 1965 or so with its most recent issue of pneumatic post. But the country that pioneered it, Austria, does not have its stamps listed. And those Austrian stamps are spectacular. They're easy to find. The second set anyway, which are engraved, a great number were sent around as specimens. They are massive stamps with the best picture of Franz Josef you're ever going to see engraved on them. Why would you not want to collect them? They're beautiful. But in fact, hardly anybody knows about them. If you went on to, let's suppose we talk now about Q. When I first started collecting stamps, I thought Q was unique to Belgium, because if you know you're Scot, there's a vast run of stamps portraying, which are intended for service on the railways of parcels. And I had no idea that any other country issued them. It wasn't until the 21st century that Scott bothered to list France, which had an equally complex system. I recommend to you, keep in touch with your catalog, read it conscientiously, because sometimes a major change takes place. The French section is massive compared to what it was not there before. And if you continue this, Scott catalog should always lead you to ask more questions. There are parcel post cancels for Italy, but for some reason we have not listed the French colonies. Congo and Madagascar both had government parcel post stamps. To the best of my knowledge, they're genuine. Another interesting one would be the PF category. This stands for a postal fiscal, and it depends on which country you look at as to whether it's listed in the regular numbers, the ones without a prefix or not. Hong Kong, Ingo and I share a passion for Hong Kong, and the high value postal fiscals are really nice stamps, and they start getting fairly pricey. But most of the time you will find them fiscally used, canceled with a company chop, used on document would be nice, but and you can't get the $10 green, which is the massive value. There's only one which I think has ever received a certificate as postal use. There was no reason to use a value that high. I think you have to realize as a British Empire collector, the hard truth, which is that your high value stamp is much more likely to have been used as a revenue. Most of them were inscribed for postage and revenue purposes. And as a tyro collector, I can remember the moment of flushed with triumph when I bought an East African Uganda 20 rupee stamp at a knockdown price. And when I got it home and looked carefully, saw that the manuscript cancel had carefully been removed from the stamp and a fake postmark put on. I was green. You have to expect that with postal fiscals. They will normally be just fiscal. But in the case of New Zealand, Scott maintains a complete and a very good listing of the tall design stamps of New Zealand, which you, the collector, have to satisfy yourself as to whether they have been used fiscally or postally. And that's a problem because in a lot of cases, you cannot distinguish. The same hand stamp would be used in a small office. And it's also important to point out to you that telegraphic usage is not easily determined, and generally those stamps do not trade for the same prices as postally used ones. But guys, there aren't many places in the world where you're mailing gold bricks with massive insurance and massive weight. Those high value stamps, there is a 5-pound stamp from the Transvaal. There are lots of copies purporting to be genuine. I suspect very few are. That's a problem. So when you have the postal fiscal section, it's up to you, the collector, to identify the stamps which should fetch the full price and the stamps which should be marked down and useful. Most people who collect this stuff would tell you 10 to 15% of Scott value is appropriate. The other thing is that Scott does not extend itself as much as Gibbons does to look at postage usage of stamps which were intended to be revenues. This happens quite a bit in the British West Indies. They're very much sought after, as you can imagine. They're also very common, but almost all the postal cancels are faked on top of manuscript pre-usage. I'm thinking of St. Lucia, St. Kitts, Nevis. You could even find it used, for example, in Jamaica. So the PF sets are an awful lot of fun in the back of the book. You could also look at something like the PR, postal tax on newspapers. If you collect Italian states, how could you not go after these beautiful stamps of the states? But they were actually not postal. They were a tax collected by the government by use of a stamp. And they are in a similar design for the most part. And for courtesy, they're listed and they're collected. There are just a couple more I'd like to mention for you guys. Military stamps, the M category. I remember how long it took me to figure out the first military stamp of Finland. It wasn't until I looked at the lettering that I thought, maybe it's here, and it was. We all know the rather boring look military stamps generally have, not when they're Austrian stamps, again, featuring Franz Josef. Very easy to find mint, fairly tough to come by in nice used condition, despite their minuscule catalogs. Their values are not high at all. I think that's about it. I just like a shout out to two things more. One is S, franchise stamps. Very few countries used franchise stamps. They were postage made specifically available to charitable organizations. Portugal used them. Switzerland used them, and they puzzled me for years. In 1911, these stamps were made available for the franchise, and each franchise would have a little number of its grant printed on the stamps for them. In 1918, they used the same design for postage due, and I was baffled for years because I didn't read my catalog properly. And I guess the only other thing I'll give a shout out to is I.O. If you go to the back of your catalog under France, you'll find stamps for the Council of Europe. Some of the most beautiful stamps designed from France, and even more beautiful, perhaps, and much harder to find used, are stamps dedicated to the single post office in the UNESCO building in Paris. showing a Cambodian, I believe it's a Cambodian head, and the smile of what is called the smile of rhymes or whatever, the Greek head. So an East-West cultural equivalency. Totally beautiful stamps, and they're found only in the back of the book. So my general comment on this is get to know your catalog, because there will be things in it that lead you on to other things. We have things not included, like Russian Zemstvo stamps, which are in the same category essentially as that Colombian departmental. We have companies which issued stamps for carriage of mail. They're in there, and there are others equally valid that are not. So you should always question the catalog and move forward in your collecting based on the questions that have come to you, and your experience will give you answers. Thanks, Joe.